Can we begin?
Yeah, just checking with Chella. Chella come on camera. Chella, can you just test your audio once?
Yeah. Hope you can hear me. Yeah. Great.
Yes.
Great, so we can start. Let's just see how many participants we have so far. Go ahead. All right. A very good afternoon to all of you present here. Welcome to our webinar. We'll be discussing today the importance of strategy and structure in sustaining workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Isha Temni. I'm an associate at the Great Place to Work Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team. Our facilitator for today is Maithili Bhupatkar, Head of Consulting Delivery at Great Place DEI. I'd like to take a moment to let you all know what we have to offer at Great Place. So just take a look and let us know if you have any queries or questions about it. We'll be showing that slide later too. So if you have anything to ask, we'll be here. So I'll start with an introduction. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists for today's webinar. I'll start with Chela. Chela Pichai is the Associate Vice President of HRD at Biocon Biologics. With 3 decades of work experience and being a biochemist graduate, Chela started manufacturing in a biotech company in India at Biocon. He moved to HR in the same company after 8 years in experience of production. After years of gaining experience across the globe, he returned to Biocon and currently heads talent, L&D, culture, DEI, and organization transformation at Biocon Biologics. He was instrumental in mentoring women leaders across Europe, China, Africa, and Asia to start women network forums as one of the initiatives under DE&I. He has been a speaker in various DEI and HR forums in Malaysia, India, Singapore, China, USA in the past. Our next panelist is Anita Rao. She is the Principal Scientific Manager at Biocon Biologics, and she's a scientist by training. And she's also the Analytical CMC Head for Development of Drugs at Biocon's Diabetes portfolio. She's the lead of the DEI Women's Chapter and believes broader, diverse representation has brought in stronger policy formulation and successful execution, and is inspired to bridge the gap between the representation of women in the biotech research field versus their representation in the leadership of the same. Our last panelist for today is Suman Ramesh. She is the Senior Director at QC at Biocon Biologics. Suman has been an ambassador for DEI at the workplace and in personal life. Having managed people for many years, she has not only understood the power of diversity, but has been a strong advocate for inclusion. She has applied DEI in all facets of her work life, starting recruitment to development. She is a part of the core team that will continue to drive DEI for Biocon Group. Welcome to all our panelists, and now I'll be handing off to Maithili to start with the moderated question session.
Thank you, Isha, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's watching us. I think at GPTW, we're always very excited to have conversations. I think we believe conversations move the action forward. We're going to keep it very deliberate to the context of Biocon Biologics and, of course, the space of DEI. If you all have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box or also chat it out with us. If you have any responses, thoughts, more than welcome to invite those. I think I'm going to start with a question to Chella. I think, Chella, the space of DEI is so vast when it comes to change that one would like to look at as an organization. What do you think is then the value of a vision or a direction in this space, and how are organizations and how did your organization embark on that journey?
Excellent. So thanks, Maithili, for inviting us and having this conversation. Diversity, equity, inclusion is not new for many organizations, including ours. And we have been consciously putting efforts over decades to ensure that there is a balanced gender approach to everything we do, because we have sensed and realized the power of having a balanced leadership, balanced approach to gender, and balanced thinking process. Probably it came primarily from our chairperson, Dr. Kiran Mazumdar Shah. She's been an inspiration for us especially when I started much earlier in this organization. So I've been there and seen that. But when the structure came into place, or when we wanted to bring a structure to diversity, equity, inclusion, and then we started looking deeply, not only externally, we started looking internally to see what was there in the past when we did not have a structure for diversity, equity, inclusion, but still we had a lot of good outcomes from diversity, equity, inclusion. And then we also picking best practices from internally, whilst we are also looking for best practices externally, and also we want to bring next practices in diversity, equity, inclusion. With that context, for us, Biocon Biologics, diversity, equity, inclusion is an integral part of who we are, and it is deeply woven into the fabric of our culture. So this brings together people, perspective, and ideas to enable stronger bonds among employees. And that's what we find as a great outcome in the diversity, equity, inclusion. And if you see, the inclusion environment earns deeper trust, which many organizations have seen, and we are also seeing, and we have seen in the past. And it brings a higher commitment. So if you look at the deeper trust and higher commitment, it leads to belongingness, right? So I think that's where the diversity, equity, inclusion is taking us. And that's where that is the purpose in this, and that's the pride in which we take, and that's what allowing us to perform as well.
So I hear you say, Chela, that there's also a larger goal of belongingness as a culture, and I think that's also one of the North Star for DEI initiatives. Could you also throw some light on, because you spoke of structure, and while you mentioned that some practices were happening at an ad hoc level, I think when structure came in, there was a sense of acceleration or an enabling factor. So could you throw some light on the structure and how that has enabled this progress?
Great. So if you look at inclusiveness and belongingness, it's agnostic to gender, right? And if it is in the center of culture, if it is not at the center of culture, then it becomes a very focused initiatives which many organizations runs in that way. Whereas in our case, when we wanted to bring a structure, primary focus has been on how do you enable the organization in multiple dimensions, from just not focusing on one particular aspect of whether it is gender or whether focusing on one area of diversity, equity, inclusion. How do you make it as a way of life, right? And to make it way of life or way of your work, you got to build this into various aspects of business, the way you do business. So that is where our endeavor in the entire structure is not just doing a tick mark activity or an initiative which is run, or we had something called Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Month. And so just not in that month, you come with some initiatives and then you leave it there. So that is where the structure allows us to create a community which constantly focus. That's where Anita and Suman as our two of our ERG leads, they run, we call it as Biocon Women Network, Biocon Biologics Women Network. So these women network is one ERG. So we have similar to BWN, there are multiple other ERGs. So we are enabling a structure through ERGs where this is not prevailing somewhere in the organization, but we want this to prevail everywhere in the organization. And it is not some point in time, but every time. So everywhere, every time, and not by one set of people like just me or Suman or Anita, but everyone. That's our endeavor, right? So everyone, everywhere, every time, if D&I can be in the mindset, it is in our action. I think that's the success which we are aspiring. And that is where I think structure will enable us.
Sure. And I think it also brings in more consistent impact, which what you're aiming at is embodying this way of life or inclusion as a mindset. I'm also going to go to Anita and Suman and ask them, because they've seen this over a period of time, and what has been their experience of how this message of an inclusive mindset is being percolated at different levels, because they're also interacting with different stakeholders. So any inputs, any observations? I'll come to you, Anita, first, and then perhaps invite Suman.
Right. First of all, thank you, Maithili, and good afternoon to everybody. So I've been with Biocon for 11 years now, and over the period, I have seen that the culture is very inclusive in the sense that I'm basically from an R&D department, and you see people from all aspects, all sorts of education qualification or from regional places come in for research, different backgrounds. Their education has been in different parts of the world. They all come in there. And that's what has initiated the initial or the beginning areas of my career, right? When I started in Biocon, I had that free-flowing information exchange, people coming from all walks of life, different kinds of background. It's research, but it's research in a broader sense. You look at all aspects of a medicinal product. And that exchange started from that side. But then as you take up more roles, more leadership roles, you realize that diversity and inclusion is a different aspect to it also. It's not just exchange of ideas, but it's what kind of people come, what kind of representation is there for you to make decisions, right? And that is when in the role, I have realized that if you talk from a women ERG, specifically in a DEI, I've realized that in the initial parts, I never noticed what kind of, how many women were there, how many men were there. You never take notice of it. I mean, you see it, but you don't stop to think about it. It's there, but you don't think about it. Okay, there are more, there are less. That kind of thought never comes. But as you take leadership roles, you look around you, you realize that, okay, as you grow higher in the organization, the representation from women is less. Not because the organization directed it that way, but it just so happens that the numbers are less. And that is the eye opener when you realize that, okay, why is it so? There were so many when I started, but now when I come up, there's so few. So creating that awareness, creating those programs to help that bridge that gap. I think that's what Biocon has done enormously. Suman and I were part of an IMB leadership program for women where all senior women leaders were sent, and there were 20 of us who went for a 3-day course in IMB, and we learned a lot, different aspects in a corporate world, right? From finance to research to quality, and how you put yourself forward and how do you encourage others. So that itself showed, and this was way back from when before Chella started saying that there was an actual focus program in place. This was much before that, right? So the mindset and the thought was always there. Now we have a focus program, focus initiatives put in place. And as part of that, Suman and I are BWN leaders. I am for research, she's for quality. And now we realize that, okay, creating this awareness, giving that assurance to younger women that what all challenges can arise, and Biocon is ready, is helping, putting in programs in place so that you don't go up there and realize that, okay, the numbers are less, and how you can improve the effectiveness of your decisions by having more representation, right? That part has come into place significantly, like Chella has said.
Sure. Thanks, Anita. I think just to summarize what you shared, I think one is it's become more conscious as an action. And it's also looking at, I think, as Chella also mentioned, multiple dimensions, gender being one.
Correct.
But I think that awareness and being alert to different dimensions of diversity starting to coming in, and therefore multi-pronged actions as well.
Correct.
Okay. Suman, over to you.
Yeah, a very good afternoon. Thank you so much, Maithili. See, in this journey, in my journey at Biocon, I have been here for last 20 years. And I would say that even though we call it as DEI of late from many years, but this culture of Biocon was always there. though we didn't call it as a DEI, there was always a value for an employee, which is already a work culture, which Biocon has actually built in, giving a good opportunity for everyone to grow, and every individual has a sense of belongingness in the workplace. This is something which I have seen, because I generally quote in other presentations also. I joined as a level 3, and today at level 11, you can know what the growth is and how Biocon values every individual. And since I lead the quality department, I have seen a diversified workforce and the process across the company, where we as a team work together to ensure bring in a good culture, and also ensure that there is no cultural resistance or lack in role models, and also it cascades down from the top management till our department or at any level. And as Chella or Anita already mentioned, we were actually honored to be a part of IIM program, which was led as a part of women in leadership. And also we try to bring in a lot of empowerment within the organization by giving a lot of importance on empowering women, empowering men, and also a lot of mentorship programs is something what we have actually taken up, where generally we see men mentoring women. But here what we have come up, probably Chella can add on later, is women mentoring men and women mentoring women. So this is some unique enriched qualities that we have seen in Biocon. And during this journey of DEI, I would always say that whatever the vision that we had, we are going in a right direction. And we have leaders, and we have support from peers, and also down the line to ensure that we have the continuity.
Yeah, and I think continuity is so important, Suman, because to sustain this change, it's also very systemic change that we are aiming for. But such a big win to have a culture that's so conducive, towards inclusion, I think, and therefore can definitely accelerate some of the changes, because that's already a big win. Just wanted to also go to Chella and check with him, what are some of the practices of this culture, Chella, that are best practices, and as you keep mentioning, innovative next practices as well.
Yeah, great. No, let me build on what Anita and Suman was saying, right? So they, with 11 years experience and 20 years experience, you see, structure was not a concern, right? But it was there, and because it was part of the culture. That's why I say, whenever I look at D&I, and whenever I talk to people, and I bring this point of D&I is deeply woven into the fabric of our culture. It is not outside the culture, right? So when it is outside a culture, for me, it is an initiative. If it is a part of the culture, then it can be every time, everyone, everywhere in the organization. If you want anything to be in that level, it has to be in the culture. Innovation is our culture, right? So that's why we say innovation is by everyone, every day, everywhere in the organization. It should not be like one set of people saying we want to innovate. Similarly, diversity, equity, inclusion is part of culture. So everyone should be taking pride of what we do, and everyone should contribute to that, right? So the way I describe this is I see, I feel, I do. I see is what I see in the organization, right? What Suman spoke, what Anita spoke is what they have seen, what they are. And then I feel is what you feel. You feel it when you receive it, right? So when I see and when I feel, and many times, many people and many organizations leave it there, right? So as a best practice, what we are adopting and what we are also recommending is to the third part, which is I do. And if I see and I feel and I don't do, then there is an action which is missing, and you cannot have this sustainable D&I practices. You can start something and see and feel it and leave it, but unless we all come together to do it, I think that's where we are bringing this pride, right? The purpose, pride, and performance. And these three P's comes and very nicely said in this to say that I take pride, hence I do. That's the performance, right? I take pride because I understand the purpose. So that is where it is deeply getting built into the culture. So talking about sustainable best and next practices. So the way we approached this, we took a design thinking. In fact, Suman, Anita, and various other leaders passionately joined this forum. We said, okay, we'll use the design thinking to build a D&I strategy. I think it worked very well for us. During design thinking, this is one of the tools where you see inclusiveness is built into the tool itself, right? So you can't be using this tool or this platform without being inclusive. So those who came and joined, all from business leaders, right? We said it should not be an HR driven. So we brought the business leaders to come together to say, what is that we want to create for organizations? So I must thank the company to allow us to design and develop a D&I framework, which we as employees feel that is important for us. I find that as a fascinating, and that's one of the best practices I feel, where don't go and tell people to do this, rather bring people, and that empathy inputs which we got collected from the design thinking is from the representation from multiple functions across the levels and across different functions within the organization. So you have the inputs as an empathy inputs, then you go on ideate, then you define the problem statement and go on ideate, right? So I think in summary, design thinking is one approach, which I call it as one of the best practices. And second, how we use the design thinking to bring some innovative practices even in D&I. So one of the innovative practices I take pride in sharing on behalf of the women leaders who have brought this is women mentoring men and women mentoring women, right? All women in this particular program. And just to give one line highlight on how this is going to enable the first-time managers being mentored, the men and women first-time managers being mentored by all women mentors, is only going to enable the men first-time managers, when they become a seasoned managers, they'll start appreciating the inclusiveness. They'll start appreciating the power of the other gender. And because you've been mentored by someone, right? So you understand, and then you get the deeper insight. And then when you hire, when you mold, when you retain, you will understand the power of all genders, right? So I think that's where we wanted to build for future. So it is a sustainable practice because it is not for today. You will not get any benefit out of these programs today, but you are creating the future men leaders who are going to embrace more and more women leaders who are going to be part of being ambassador for women leaders. Right, so that is what has been targeted through this program. And so these two I wanted to share, and maybe if time permits, we'll talk more, but I'll let me pause there.
Sure. No, thanks, Shal. Actually, very exciting to know about this practice. And all women mentoring initiative, I think, is exciting, and we would love to know about this journey as we move forward and the impact, of course, on the larger demographic of this practice for sure. Also wanted to unpack this a little bit, Chela. You spoke about I see, I feel, I do. And I see that there is a very clear bias for action when it comes to DEI change. But at a very mainstream or banal level on a day-to-day basis, how is this getting influenced for, say, people managers or managers who are creating the experience for employees? If you could share a couple of approaches that Biocon Biologics has followed for that.
Great, I'll start, and Anita and Subin also could have their inputs. So one of the way we thought cascading can be powerful is through ERGs, right? So unless you have this network where people passionately come and drive certain initiatives around the D&I culture, right? So the multiple ERGs been looked at, and then there are 3-4 is already in action. One of the successful one is the Women Network, and of course we have this next generation network where millennial networks and Gen Z network, which is also an important diversity to look into as an organization, because we have a huge number of millennials, and in the last 2 years you see a lot of Gen Zs are coming into corporate, and we also have a good number of almost a double digit of Gen Z already in the organization. So which is a huge generation to focus on, because they are the future, right? So apart from that, we also have something called the PWD focus, and then moving on to the other areas, such as even we have something called all-timers network, which is those those employees who have stayed long, like Suman, and there are people with 25 years, 30 years in the company, right? That's a great, being a company of 40 years old and 42 years old, and you see 30 years people in the company who are still in the company and contributing. That shows a lot about the culture which Suman spoke and Anita spoke, right? And that's where I see and I feel, right? There are people who have stayed and enjoyed. And that's why I said, as a best practice, we also look internally. Since I also started my career here, I'm able to resonate. While we're trying to bring structures, one should not forget to look internally to see what are the best practices we had, right? Maybe it is either diminishing, or it was there and we didn't pick it up now, or it may be subtly there. So how do we bring that as a prominent thing if it really worked for us, right? So that is one thing which I see as a very powerful way of bringing the internal best practices back into the structure, and then look for the external best practices, and then of course the next practices, and that's where we are talking about. One of that is the women mentoring men, all women mentoring men and women, and also there is something called unconscious bias, which we have started bringing it from the day one, and think we're one of those first organizations to do that, where the orientation program has unconscious bias. If someone joins today, and they will go through that program, because we don't want that to be later part. And can they take oath and commit for unconscious bias from day one? Because we are pretty serious about creating an inclusive environment. I think we should start from day one. And we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion on day one. I feel I do starts from day one for all the newcomers. For many months we are doing this. So that is how I'm seeing it. Of course, Anita and Subir, if you want to add to that.
Sure, Suman, I'll go first. So Chela said, I will talk about what in the R&D chapter specifically, what we are trying to do. So what I said initially is that you see, as women grow in their career, you start seeing sort of a leaky pipeline, right? So fewer numbers are there in the higher sort of roles. So the first thing what we've done is basically, as an inclusive culture, the first meeting we had as soon as the chapter was initiated is asking what would women want, what would women scientists or employee want, so that they see themselves being in that role someday, right? I've been here 11 years. I know what I've gone through, what the journey is, and what the experience is. As you grow in your career, you grow in your personal life also, and it's a balance between both your professional and personal life. And for some people, it comes easily because support networks have been there. For some people, it's not. But it's always a case of being aware of what is out there, what is not there, and what can I do to bridge that gap, right? So one of the things which came up is that I think we are more than 150 women in R&D today. And it's difficult to have a very informal or a very personal sort of exchange when the group is so large. I mean, when it's such a large group meeting, it always becomes a formal environment, right? You meet in a big auditorium and then there's no personal connect. So what we've started something is called small support groups. So we've created groups of 6 or 7 people where there's one senior person sort of championing and initiating that group conversation. And then these groups are going to stay for life or for as long as they are as part of Biocon, or even after they're part of Biocon. It becomes like a support network for that group of 5 or 6 women throughout their journey, right? And they decide how they want to meet, when they want to meet, how informal it needs to be. And that has turned out to be really good, because people are now exchanging, it becomes like a friend group, right? Like 6, but it's on a professional basis, because you know all of these women are part of Biocon, they are in R&D, they have grown, they have come to that stage, and I see myself at that stage someday, and I want to know how I enable, or if there are any obstacles or challenges, how I overcome that. And then this is just starting. So then we plan to have intergroup sort of connects so that people exchange what has happened. I think this is one way of starting the dialogue, increasing awareness so people understand how important it is to have diversity. And women is one way, but this can be done for all groups, right? And you understand the power when diversity comes in, how much of a representation value brings into the policy and decision. I think that's the broad view of what we are taking, and continuity is going to be maintained year on year. These groups will go on, and we bring in more programs to bring these groups closer. I think that's one way what we have done in R&D. Sure, going forward, we'll have more enablers to increase the dialogue and have more representation. Suman can add more what she's done in her chapter.
Yeah. As Anita said, we also have a chapter from quality. We call it as a chapter in one. And we are 168 women in that. What we try to bring is empowering them, and then ensure that the women has a full circle to create, nurture, and transform. And they have that magical power to create and transform. This is what we try to bring. First is integrity, bring them all together, and then help them to rise. And then, like, we are all students every day, so we try to give them a kind of nurturing to ensure that we all, and without failure, we don't have a success. So how to handle a failure is defeat a problem and success will follow. This is Abdul Kalam's quote, which we try to follow that. And we ensure that every woman in quality are integrated, and we try to empower and bring in a lot of inclusion within them and support for their growth. This is what we have taken up.
Thanks, Suman, Anita, and Chela for sharing. I think some very uplifting work, also very individualized. And I think more and more the work that we do with organizations, I think one thing that is emerging is finding your own recipe when it comes to a structure, approach, and also practices. But Anita, thank you for sharing the smaller group practice. Actually, normalizing conversations in smaller group, I think, are so powerful and underrated today. And you've been able to structure that into a full-fledged sustainable practice. So really kudos to you and the team. And of course, also Suman's work in all women mentoring. So thank you for sharing those. Suman spoke about failure. So I'm going to come to very quickly to a few learnings before we go into our rapid fire. But Chela, I'll start with you and then rotate it around. You've had so much experience across geographies, across demographics as well. What has been one learning individually or as in the context of an organization in the DEI space that you always carry with you?
The great question, Maitri. Let me go without mincing words on this, right? The diversity, equity, inclusion starts from individual, from me first. The best way to measure, and this also I talk to anyone when I conduct unconscious bias training or any facilitation, I do reflect on this, and I want to lead by example and also walk the talk, and then see if I can influence others. The first thing is it should start with self, and the best way to measure is at home. How equal opportunity you are having at home. I wouldn't even use the word providing at home. It's not men need to provide, and that language has to move. It's not I'm giving, I'm providing. What am I getting at home, and how am I creating that? How am I influencing that atmosphere? If it is not there, if it is there, am I contributing? Am I seeing and feeling, or am I doing? And that is a good measurement for everybody. Then you bring it to the society when you travel to your office, right? How are you seeing yourself in a unequal society in a way, right? It's not equal, but how do you see? How do you influence when you commute to organization? Then comes organization, right? And if we carry the dual personality of in office, I try to embrace, but home, I don't do it. and then we won't be able to walk the talk. So that's the learning I've taken the last more than a decade, been involved in multiple country chapters and mentoring the Women Network, and also being a part of DNI. One thing which I taken for is it should be measured at home, and it should be measured every day, and conscious efforts has to be put in.
Yeah, and very well said, Chela, and that's a great message for all of us as a daily reminder. And I think also organizations that just enable you to bring the same persona into the workspace, I think need to be applauded as well. Otherwise, we are constantly negotiating between two personalities. So thank you for sharing that. Anita, any learning from your end in this journey?
Yeah, so I think one learning, or I'm still learning, I would like to say, still figuring it out, is when we talk about diversity, again taking the women group as an example, right? How do you, I think for me, it's for anybody, it's a very subtle line when you talk about increasing representation. It's just not a matter of numbers, right? So you have to be very careful in how you communicate, how you position yourself. That here, for example, if we take one particular role, a leadership role, and you see that the number of women across a particular department are fewer and there are more men, it's not making it equal, right? The potential, the capability also has to be recognized. So when you bring in this unconscious bias and you say you need to hire more women to make that equal, it needs to be messaged in a certain way that a particular candidate is hired not because she's a woman, because she has the potential and she's a woman. So her representation brings in value when in that particular peer group. And that messaging, how do you do it? So even as a women leader for this chapter, when we put certain programs in place or certain events, I always get from the other men employees, right? Why only women? Why are we excluded from all this, right? So it's not about exclusion. So inclusion of women doesn't mean exclusion of men. That messaging, how to do it, I mean, it's a work in progress, I would say. For every event, we need to target it in a certain way, depending on what the audience is. And I think that's a major learning, which if we succeed in that, then the diversity doesn't even need to become a talk, right? It just becomes equity at that point. It is not diversity anymore. It's everybody has equal chance. So I think that's the final goal where we need to get to.
Yeah, and very true. I think diversity also is an and criteria. I think the messaging around that has to be very consistent as well, because it's merit and diversity that comes in. So I hear you. I think we're all unlearning, relearning some of those pieces.
Correct.
Yeah. Suman?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, every day is a learning for us. So we need to learn from each one of us, starting from a small child to an old person, something to learn. But at Biocon, I would say that a lot of things that needs to be learned is like stop saying words and start thinking action is something what I would say. And also, do not underestimate yourself. You have a strength within yourself. Somebody needs to polish out for the current generation, wherein we are there, where we have a little more experience than them, so that we need to ensure to bring them up as a next second level leaders is something which I have learned, and I have been practicing that to ensure it is immaterial of any gender. Because we have a lot of women in quality and also equally men also. So each one of them should be a part of a leader in this company. And that is how we try to bring them more into the inclusion part, and also try to maintain diversity and equity. And this is how that we try to bring Maithili.
Yeah, and I think just recognizing your own responsibility as a leader, Suman, is so uplifting. And also then looking at, how can we lift other women up as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I think with this, I'm just going to quickly summarize some thoughts from this conversation. I think one is to look at what practices we have and build on them, and also individualize them while we borrow from external best practices. I think the second piece that I really take away is how can we make inclusion intuitive? So if I have an unconscious bias session in my onboarding kit, I'm already embedding it in a process, so it doesn't become an event outside the onboarding. And I think the importance of structure, and I think in this case, ERG, and also having women role models who are championing this cause, and also therefore through the experience creating very individualized practices for their chapters. I think those are some areas that I take away from this conversation. So thank you so much, Anita, Chela, and Suman. I'm going to hand it over to Isha for a rapid fire and then take a few audience questions that have started coming in.
Thank you, Maithili. Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. So now for the rapid fire round, I'll be asking you 3 to 4 questions, and it's mostly, it's a fun format. So whoever feels like they'd be best suited to answer the question can go first. There's no compulsion. Okay, I'll start with the first one, and we're all answering quickly. How would you respond to the following statement? It's challenging to find women candidates for operational roles in manufacturing. Yes, Suman.
I would say no. See, women are in all the various areas in the organization and in the world. So I would say that manufacturing is not challenging at all for women. And we have seen the transformation in our own company, where earlier in the operation field, we had very handful women, but now today we can say that we have many women in manufacturing leading, like we have Aditi, who is the leader from manufacturing, who is actually leading this BW1, one of the chapters. So that way I would never say that it is challenging to find women. That would be my answer.
I agree with Suman. I don't think it's challenging at all. I think it's open, so you can hire. I mean, I'm sure there'll be applicants and who are willing to work. So.
Great. Cool. So our second question, what do you think comes first? Hiring historically excluded groups or building an inclusive culture?
May I go first? Yeah.
Yes, go Anita.
I think both of them are related because one cannot exist without the other, is what I think. Because unless you have a culture, you wouldn't have gone ahead and hired historically excluded groups. And for you to have that inclusive culture, you need those groups to be there. So one cannot exist without the other. But I think overall, the mindset needs to be there first to have that culture in place, and then automatically everything else falls into place, right? So the mindset is needed first. And like Chala said, you see, you feel, that feeling has to come, only then you will do. So that's how it goes.
So I would add on to Anita. As she said, both are interlinked. But in Biocon, we would say that we already have that inclusive environment, wherein we have already built it. And this is linked with the hiring of excluded group. So both are interlinked and I agree with what Anita said. Chala, you want to add anything?
Great. I think that's exactly what I wanted to say, that the environment is first. Then comes these 2 questions. So I'm bringing another angle to this there. Like Anita said, you need an environment. And the last thing to do is hire and not enable them because you don't have an environment for that. Right? Build the environment, bring people, and grow them. And of course, it's a continuous process, right? It's not again, you build and then people come and think that somebody will build for us and we will grow. Rather, you say, I see, I feel, and I do. So the do part is very important for any culture, and especially here, DNA is our culture. DNA also our culture.
Wonderful. So our true or false questions now. First one, hiring persons with disabilities is more challenging in manufacturing than in other industries. True or false?
False.
False.
Are there any follow-up, any reason why?
No,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Chala.
I came from manufacturing. I started my career in manufacturing. The reason why this question comes is there's a bit of very different industries with a different manufacturing skill set requirement. Right now, operating a machine, then we are talking about PWD, and if certain machineries require certain ability, and then PWD can be a challenge, right? But for a general statement, I agree with Anita and Suman that it's false, because we cannot generalize saying exclude that function, or industry saying that PWD cannot be there. Today we have a lot of examples, right? And how these industries with manufacturing have come forward to create an environment where you can enable, because it's not just machinery, there are a lot of associated functions around it where you could have PWD talent and being part of the organization.
Anita, you wanted to follow up?
No, so that's what I was saying. There's nothing to do with why you cannot hire a particular group in a particular way. It's just being open about it. So if I'll give an example, which is completely out of manufacturing, right? So 20 years ago, I would have never thought that we would have women bus conductors, right? When I was taking those public transport buses to college and school, I never even thought that they would be. They were always men. But now you see women conductors in Bangalore in BMTC buses, and it's just that not that women suddenly realize that 20 years later they could do that job. It's not, right? It's somebody is willing to hire, willing to open that opportunity, and once that is open, women thought, yeah, why not, right? Come. So it's the same thing with any group. When you open things up, people will come, and it's just that environment creating that culture is what is needed.
Sounds great. And our last rapid fire question: true or false? Without diversity in leadership, organizations will fail to innovate.
True.
I think what we have spoken the entire last 35 minutes is all really leading to that, right? Where if you have more diversity, more representation, a broader representation, you have different kind of viewpoints coming in. And then your policies are much more inclusive, because then you're catering to all groups. And then it's more effectively implemented and sustainable. I think it just flows. So
I'll only add one more point. It's not only the representation of diversity. I'm saying agnostic to gender here, and it's going beyond gender, all forms of diversity, right? But are you inclusive? In some cases, you have a great diversity, but you're not inclusive enough. So you're missing out on a great perspective from people in a conversation, because you're not inclusive enough. You just go with one or two dominant points or dominant thoughts, or you're not putting conscious effort. That I do is not there, right? You're not giving, rather you're coming out of a conversation to say, hey, well, no one listens to me. There can be a situation where diversity is there, but inclusiveness is not enabling the diversity to prevail, so that you're getting the best of the diversity. And that's why the equity piece will get missed, because you're not having an inclusion. So it's well connected, right? And all this put together leads to belongingness. I think that's where I get fascinated about diversity and inclusion, because all this for what? Like our chairperson says, the purpose, pride, and performance, and all this leads to one thing, which is a belongingness. I think that is what is you can passionately see from what Suman said or Anita said, 10, 11 years and 20 years, and I have cumulative 17 years in this organization. It all goes back to one thing, which is the belongingness, right? And also, it's a belongingness leads to belong. Means stay long.
That's a good spin on the word, Chela. Yeah.
Okay. So now we'll round up the audience questions. We'll take a minute to round up the audience questions. Until then, we'll just like to quick reminder of everything that we do at Great Place DEI. We'll get back in a few seconds with the audience questions. All right, great. So we have our questions ready. Natalie, would you like to go?
Sure. So I think our first question is from Benny, and I'll just direct it to anyone who can pick it up. What has been the male-female ratio in Biocon biologics over the last decade? And are we looking at any strategic initiatives beyond female employees?
Great. I'll take this question, and it varied the last decade, right? It's never same number. I was talking to someone, and a person was asking about when I joined 2 decades back in this organization, the very own organization. What was the number? Somebody asked that question. So I didn't have a record to verify. I could have done it, but I just went with my memory. Then I realized that my manager in manufacturing was a women manager, right? So I have reported to a women manager in manufacturing. So today we are talking about manufacturing. The question is can we have women in manufacturing? And I had a women manager. We are talking about PWD for manufacturing. 20 years back, we had one person. And he's still with the company, right? So the point is, it was we didn't have a structure DNI. We never went for, we certified by Great Place to Work as last year for the DNI. We never had any of this in the past, but still there were strong DNI practices in unstructured form was providing in the organization. And we had so many women leaders on top, right from our chairperson, and there are so many heads of functions where women leaders. And so as the company started growing, the number varied. So to answer Benny's question, the last decade, there were different ratios, but we are progressing. It's in a positive direction. And at this point in time, it is also there in our annual reports. We have crossed 20, and then certain functions we are, like for example, R&D, we are above 40%, which is very good. And we wanted to become an equal company in 2030. So we have an aspiration, we have a target, we are working on it. So we are in a right direction, I would say, right? And the second question is about apart from women, as I said, when we are looking at diversity, we are going beyond gender for sure. At the same time, there is a target we take and work on it, because you have to address the whatever you want to focus on, right? Whilst you can have a lot of good to have, at the same time you need to have a focus. So gender diversity is one of our focus, but it doesn't stop there. PWD there, and then as I said, ERG networks are in everything, and going beyond the women network to generation networks, and then various other networks we have, including a performing art network, right? So
sure. Thanks, Chella. I think I'm just going to stick to the gender piece because we have a question related to that, and then perhaps zoom out a little on the intervention per se. There's a question from Mohan, who says that for manufacturing sector, engaging women round the clock would be a concern legally and also operationally as per some government regulations. What are some of your thoughts of engaging women round the clock? And if you could share that with us, yeah.
Great. So in my personal view, and having worked in manufacturing, started career in manufacturing, there are certain concerns, and Mohan is very right in terms of how do we influence, certain clarity around the legal implication from the government perspective, as he's mentioning. So that is one part. But I would say what organization can do is start with where it's possible within manufacturing, right? And I think the beginning is very important. If you don't start, as someone said, if you don't speak, just action it, right? So how do we action it? It can be a good beginning in general shifts, right? So start there and see how you can bring that diversity there. And then you will start finding the power of diversity, right? And which other functions are able to see, why not in manufacturing? So when you start appreciating that, then probably you will find a way to bring within the norms. And of course, we can't go against certain norms of the government or the work norms. But certainly within the norms, we will be finding an opportunity to enable and create an environment for diversity.
Yeah, and I also see organizations have found success with piloting it in where it works, creating a success story of it, and using that to also influence other stakeholders.
In fact, in today's LinkedIn post, Biocon has posted, if you would see, that there are a good number of women employees we have hired, and with them, there is a picture we have taken. Proud to welcome 17 women colleagues in our manufacturing force. That's not the only number, but these are all just recent hires of 17 in Biocon has posted. And similarly, in my orientation program, I see a good number of women employees joining in manufacturing.
Great. I think a couple of zoom out questions, and I'll open it out to also Anita and Suman. There is a question from Janvi, and she's asked about, we all start leaders, organizations start talking about DEI, and then midway, you just lose track and it kind of evaporates the entire conversation and you start again. We've seen that rotating cycle, and she's asked, what are some of the reasons behind that?
I think the main reason is that sustenance, right? So whatever programs you put in place, you need to think about how you enable. So for example, Chela said unconscious bias. They are doing it as part of orientation. So you're making sure that every employee who joins Biocon is programmed or is learning about it, is made aware about it. So things like that you start putting in places where every person who comes in is aware of what is going on, and your programs have to be inclusive. Only if it is inclusive and you keep adding to people who are joining new, and then people who are there have already gone through the program once or are aware. And that maintaining that sustenance and continuity is what will enable it. Eventually, we have to understand that DEI is not only Biocon's agenda, right? Every organization is taking it. It is going in all aspects of life. You start seeing DEI. So people who are joining also might not be that unaware as they were like 5 years back, right? So the extent of your programs can come down. You don't need to have that much of intensity, but you still need to have it because you want to make sure that 100% it runs and every employee feels that sense of belonging and inclusivity in there. So thinking about that and onboarding, that onboarding process is a very efficient way, an effective way of making sure that that stays. And eventually maybe you won't need unconscious bias because in the society itself it will come. I don't know how many years, maybe 20, 30 years, but it will be there. You can then take it off and you may at that point maybe something else needs to come in. And that thinking I think all of us bring in because we come from different walks of life. We understand how to implement it, and that comes by being diverse and inclusive to make these programs successful, I think.
Yeah, I think the more systemic, Anita, it is, the less governance it requires, right? Because otherwise it then becomes episodic or event based, and that requires more resources at that particular time. So thank you for sharing that. I think I'm going to take one last question and close the conversation. Dhruvi has asked a question about, and metrics, because metrics is an evolving space now in DEI. How can we correlate DEI with employee retention?
Great, I'll take this question, and it's for retention. There is a lot of dimensions and factors. Right? A simple way to understand this is putting ourselves into shoes. Right? And for example, I've done this stay interview with people like Suman and Anita, and when I talk to them, and I do see what drives them, right? What keeps them. And I ask this question to myself, and if you go and ask people who've stayed in an organization, and that's the retention we are talking about, and they would invariably say that they were feeling valued in the organization, right? And Suman has responded to this question in different forms. I've asked her in many different forums, but what came out one strong from Suman passionately says, this place, I feel part of this organization because I belong here, right? And so certainly the belongingness is outcome of DNI, but there can be many other things also leads to belongingness, right? And so in my view, we can measure and we can attribute some of the retention towards D&I. But that is not alone a factor. There are various other factors. But one of the big contributors is the belongingness, and the inclusiveness leads to belongingness for sure. Various research has shown, and our own story is a research input, right? And so that way, belongingness will lead to retention. And how do you create the belongingness? Each organization will have their own measures, and certainly diversity, equity, inclusion can add to belongingness.
Thank you for that, Chela. And I think principally that's a good approach to have when you also look at retention and also engagement of employees. I think I'm going to close with one last question from my end. And this is in the context of pharma manufacturing. What's next for this space when it comes to DI? Where do you think it's moving? If I could just quickly go round robin and if you could share your immediate thoughts.
Want me to start?
Sure, Chela.
So we are an integrated, fully integrated organization, right? And we're just not manufacturing, research and development, quality and enabling functions altogether. It's an integrated, including sales and marketing, right? So specific to your question, where is it going, especially from the pharma manufacturing? Is that your question, or?
Yeah, in terms of the industry space, Chela.
Industry space, okay. In terms of pharmaceutical industry, if you see, certainly it's going in a direction where many organizations are realizing the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion. And then the reason being, today there is it's one of those rare times where you see 4 generations are working together, right? So and then there is a huge force of the different generation and need to work together, and with the digital disruption is all the more you need to revisit your practices, revisit your mindset, like Anita says, revisit your what kind of environment you're creating, because what worked in the past may not necessarily will work now, right? So just not best practices, there is a need for next practices. So to Janvi's question, I was trying to respond saying, we need, why it is some D&I practices is not working, because the sustainability issue, like Anita said, and the reason being it is not futuristic enough, right? So that is where I think the organizations are going. Organization wants to come, at least in our organization, we want not only best practice, also next practice. And we wanted to make sure that we are in this not as a race, or we are not here for proving to others. Rather, we want to prove to ourselves that how we can create that belongingness for our colleagues, so that they take that pride and driven by purpose and they perform.
Sure. Thanks, Chela. Anything from your end, Anita? And then come to Suman for the last word.
I think I'm not sure if I can comment specifically in the pharmaceutical industry, but at least in Biocon, that the drive is there to make sure that the representation, diversity, inclusivity is there in all departments, right? Like Chela said, overall as a Biocon, you see some DEI metrics or whatever you want to call it, but it is still separate. When you look at individual departments or individual sectors within this pharmaceutical manufacturing drug development space, it is different, right? For example, research and development, we have good numbers. We don't need to put in that much of effort as we need to do in manufacturing to bring the numbers up, because representation is good. But that said, in manufacturing, it is opening up, like I said, and in Biocon, I have seen, like in the recent 8 or 9 months, a lot of talk. Like we said, we have Aditi, a lead for the manufacturing chapter, and she is targeting and putting in programs which are specific for that particular environment, that manufacturing environment, right? And that is what I think every company or every industry is going to do, because everybody is realizing the value, or it was there, everybody knew it, but now they're putting in as a specific goal or a strategic initiative to tap on that resource, right? We were not tapping. We realized that that's an untapped source, so we should try and bring all groups in there. I think it is opening up like any other industry is. I think pharmaceutical is also moving in the right direction.
Sure. Thanks, Anita. I think Suman needed to log off, but Suman, do you have anything quickly to share with us, and then we'll let you go?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as already covered by Chella and Anita, no, this has been a part of culture in Biocon. It is like how we say it is in the blood of a person. It is the culture which Biocon already has, which is cascading down from the leadership level down the all the levels. So that way, this empathetic leadership has led this organization to take this DIE to a different level, and also ensure to have a focused group to sustain this DIE for a longer term. I know Chella has been one of the key person who has been driving this. And I mean, in this many years, what I have seen is there were programs where we initiated but could not sustain. But this program is something where it's the involvement from every individual I could see, and this is cascading down from the induction program, which has been as a part of employees talent acquisition. It starts. And we as leaders take out in individual departments, as Aditi said, each one of us are driving and ensure to bring in a lot of second level leaderships so that they can drive it further.
Thank you so much, Suman. It's been lovely to chat with all of you. Thank you, Anita, Chella, Suman once again, and also Isha for hosting this. I think conversations like this will just help us unlearn and relearn more of what we already do. And I think what I'm going to take away from this conversation is I see, I feel, and I do. And always good to exaggerate the last part for change. So thank you so much to all of you, and have a great evening. And thank you to our audiences for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.